Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Nick Harper from Washington DC, and these are the top headlines of the day. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan meets China's top diplomat Yang Shiqiu in Rome amid tensions over Ukraine. The meet comes as the West raises concerns over China's possible assistance to Russia in the ongoing conflict. Delegations from Moscow and Kyiv hold the fourth round of negotiations. Ukraine says an immediate ceasefire and withdrawal of Russian troops remains on top of its list of demands. The Kremlin doesn't rule out Russia could take full control of major Ukrainian cities and cautions the West, saying that it has sufficient military clout to fulfill all its aims in Ukraine without any help from China. At least 16 people have been killed and dozens injured as missile strikes hit a city centre in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine. Videos of the aftermath show burnt cars and damaged infrastructure. Shanghai shuts schools, parks and cinemas as COVID cases surge across the Chinese financial hub. Over 2,000 new coronavirus infections reported in China today as it battles to combat the latest outbreak. And Sri Lankan finance ministers hold talks with top IMF officials as the country seeks to deal with the economic crisis. The island nation is likely to begin formal negotiations with the IMF next month to boost reserves. Well, it's now been 19 days since Russia invaded Ukraine, and there is no end in sight to the relentless shelling of Ukrainian cities. As Russian troops continue to inch closer to the capital city, the United States has opened its communications channel with China. The US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and China's top diplomat Yang Shiqiu have arrived at the venue in Rome. The American and Chinese officials are meeting at Rome's Cavalieri Waldorf Astoria Hotel. These talks can potentially have far-reaching and significant consequences, not only for the ongoing war in Ukraine, but for China's relationship with the West. The West is concerned that Beijing might take further steps to aid its strategic partner, Russia. According to the latest US media reports, Moscow has asked Beijing for military assistance in Ukraine, including drones. But China has denied it was asked by Russia for military equipment or any other assistance to support the war in Ukraine. When asked whether Russia had asked China for military assistance, Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijiang called the claims disinformation peddled by the United States against China.
Recently, the US has been spreading successive disinformation targeting China on the Ukraine issue with malicious intentions. China's position on the Ukraine issue has been clear and consistent.
Today's meeting between Yang and Sullivan is seen as furthering a move towards better communication laid out by the presidents of the US and China in their summit late last year. The two sides will discuss ongoing efforts to manage the competition between their two countries, as well as the impact of Russia's war against Ukraine on regional and global security. But the United States National Security Advisor has warned Beijing against helping Russia, threatening the communist regime with sweeping sanctions. Well, our correspondent Susan Tarani is joining us live from New York. Susan, what are the expectations for this meeting that's taking place in Rome today?
Right. Nick, as you mentioned, it really comes in the backdrop of those claims by the United States and confirmed by a number of media outlets that Russia did indeed ask for military aid from China, and definitely that's really going to be at the forefront of these discussions. And as Jake Sullivan mentioned on Sunday, despite the denial by the two sides, Russia and China, the United States really wants to make clear that there will be economic consequences like sanctions if China goes ahead and provides that kind of military aid and tries to save Russia in one way or the other from sanctions imposed by the West. It was interesting that Sullivan said there will be absolutely consequences for, quote, large-scale sanctions evasion efforts or support to Russia to backfill them. So it's not yet clear whether or not small-scale sanctions evasion efforts will be punished by the United States on the part of China or not. But also on the agenda, ongoing efforts to manage competition between these two countries, the world's largest economies. This meeting was going to take place regardless of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. These two sides had been meeting even prior to that highly publicized meeting between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping. However, as meetings between these two countries often go, even according to U.S. officials, not much is supposed to really come out of this meeting. There isn't supposed to be some kind of grand statement or anything coming out. Low hopes among administration for any breakthrough for this. It's not about negotiating any specific issue or outcome. However, the U.S. official, this is a quote coming out of the NSA, saying that the meeting is taking place in the context of Russia's unjustified and brutal war against Ukraine, and as China has aligned itself with Russia to advance their own vision of the world order. Now, despite these claims by the United States that Russia has asked China for military aid, it's not yet clear whether or not China would even want to get into that territory and help Russia, considering the fact that it does see some of its own interests being jeopardized. So we'll wait and see what really comes out of this meeting, but definitely low hopes and the issue of Ukraine and Russia at the forefront, but also a lot of issues pertaining to economic competition between the two sides as well.
And Susan, as you mentioned, there are low hopes, low expectations for this meeting. It was already planned even before the invasion by Russia of Ukraine. Is there some hope, at least, that this may begin to put Washington and Beijing back on some sort of diplomatic path to improve relations, even if there's no specific outcomes coming out of this meeting?
It's hard to talk about this meeting out of the context of the Russia-Ukraine invasion, but I think it's important to note that, first of all, it'll be interesting to see whether or not reports and assumptions are true that along with other European capitals, if Beijing is interested in taking a mediation effort and trying to provide Russia and the United States with an off-ramp regarding the current conflict in Ukraine, and whether or not it wants to play mediator between the two sides. So perhaps that might be one aspect of it. Another aspect would be, considering the fact that Russia is really asking Beijing for these military aids. If that report is true, it signifies that Russia is really in need and does not have the proper military equipment. Again, that really puts these discussions on the forefront that perhaps Beijing really didn't expect the invasion to take such a left turn, and it's reconsidering that kind of pact that it made with Moscow before the Olympics. So there might be some kind of realignment. But, you know, relationships between the United States and China have been at an all-time low in recent months. It's hard to imagine that anything substantial would come out of this meeting. But I think China is really walking on eggshells right now because it's watching how the United States responds to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it can't help but wonder how to move really strategically in dealing with the United States on the one hand, and you know, its future and aspirations for Taiwan on the other.
Thank you, Susan. That was Susan Tarani joining us live from New York City. A US journalist has been killed and 2 others wounded in the city of Irpin, a suburb outside the capital Kyiv, that has seen some of the fiercest fighting as Russian troops have been surrounding the capital. Brent Renard was an award-winning documentary maker. His work included an HBO documentary on addiction, and he'd reported on a wide range of global stories, including the Black Lives Matter movement. Previously, he'd reported from Afghanistan, Iraq and Haiti. In 2014, he won a Peabody Award for a series on Chicago schools. In Ukraine, he was working for Time Studios on a project about the global refugee crisis. Time issued a statement saying that they were devastated by the loss and called for the safety of journalists to be able to cover the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. A surgeon volunteering for the Ukrainian Territorial Defence said that Renard died instantly from a gunshot wound to the neck. Ukraine has called it a deliberate attack by the Russian army, with President Zelensky saying the Russian troops knew what they were doing.
Сьогодні у Київській області був убитий американський журналіст Брент Ренол. Його колега поранений. Це був свідомий напад російських військових. Вони знали, що вони роблять, але, схоже, не всі на Заході знають, що вони роблять.
The second American journalist who was wounded in the attack is Juan Arredondo. He was rushed to a hospital in Kyiv after the attack. Lying in a hospital bed, he recounted that he and Renard were going to film other refugees leaving when their vehicle came under fire. At the time of the interview, Juan was not aware of Renard's death.
Tell me please, what is your name?
Juan.
Juan? Where are you from?
The U.S.
Yes. What happened to you?
We crossed the first bridge in Irpin. We were going to film other refugees leaving, and we got into a car. Somebody offered to take us to the other bridge, and we crossed a checkpoint, and they started shooting at us. So the driver turned around, and they kept shooting. It's 2 of us. My friend is Brent Renault, and he's been shot and left behind.
Russia is looking to turn the heat back on the West. As Western sanctions take hold, Russia has threatened foreign companies withdrawing from the country with arrests and seizures. According to the Wall Street Journal, Russian prosecutors have issued threats to several foreign countries via calls, letters and even personal visits. The companies include giants like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, IBM and Yum Brands, which is the parent company of KFC and Pizza Hut. All these companies have announced shutting down operations in Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. Reports say that such warnings have prompted at least one company to limit communications between its Russian business and the rest of the company, out of fear that their internal communications may be intercepted. A host of major global companies have suspended operations now in Russia. McDonald's Corporation announced its temporary halt of all 847 of its restaurants in Russia. The closure of the McDonald's restaurants will also carry symbolic importance in Russia. The first McDonald's restaurant in central Moscow back in 1990 became an iconic symbol of the flourishing American capitalism as the Soviet Union fell. McDonald's has assured that it would continue to pay salaries to its 62,000 employees in Russia. Starbucks, too, has suspended all of its business activities in Russia, including store operations and support staff of nearly 2,000 employees in the country. They've even halted all their shipments to Russia. Coca-Cola is also suspending all of its business in Russia. The company stated that it will monitor the situation and its operations as things change. Other companies have also suspended operations to further isolate the Russian economy. This includes companies offering payment services, other companies from the accounting sector, aviation sector, streaming services, tech, automobile, retail, and the energy sector. Moscow has faced unprecedented sanctions imposed by Western governments on its banks, businesses, and oligarchs. The Russian currency, the ruble, has seen a tremendous drop in value against the dollar, leaving Russian authorities scrambling to prevent money from leaving its borders in order to stop the ruble's value from further dropping.
Вопросам, которые пройти.
Уважаемые коллеги, поздравляем.
Вопросам, которые пройти.
Iraq's foreign ministry on Sunday summoned Iran's ambassador to protest against a ballistic missile attack on its northern Kurdish regional capital of Erbil. It called it a flagrant violation of the country's sovereignty. This comes after Iran claimed responsibility for a missile barrage that struck near a sprawling US consulate facility in northern Iraq. The attack is said to be against Israeli strategic centres in the city. Issuing a statement, the Iraqi Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that the attack had caused damage to civilian facilities and homes of citizens, further calling it a violation of international law and norms, and demanding an explanation from the Iranian leadership. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards have also warned that any further attacks by Israel will be met with a harsh and destructive response. Iran's Revolutionary Guard on its website said that it had attacked what it said was an Israeli spy centre in Erbil. And in another statement, Iran said that Israel had been on an offensive after the strike killed 2 members of the Revolutionary Guard. The US State Department has condemned the attack, but said that no American national had been injured and no damage to its facilities in Erbil had been reported. The attack came several days after Iran said it would retaliate for an Israeli strike that killed 2 members of the Revolutionary Guard. Israel's Foreign Minister, Lapid, met with Romania's Prime Minister on Sunday to discuss the situation in Ukraine before moving on to Slovakia for further discussions. While in Bucharest, he also met refugees from Ukraine who are about to move to Israel. Our correspondent Jodie Cohen brings you this report.
Visiting the Romanian-Ukrainian border on Sunday, Lapid said that Israel has a, quote, moral obligation to be part of the international effort to help refugees from Ukraine find a warm home and a bed to sleep in. On Sunday, the Israeli government announced that in addition to accepting 25,000 Ukrainians who are not eligible for citizenship, anyone with relatives in Israel will be allowed entry. Israel is also reportedly preparing for the possibility of large-scale immigration of Jewish people from both Russia and Ukraine. On Saturday evening, Ukrainian President Zelensky and Israeli Prime Minister Bennett spoke on the phone for more than an hour after Zelensky had suggested that Israel holds mediation talks between Ukraine and Russia in Jerusalem. Zelensky reportedly also asked Bennett to mediate with Russia for the release of Melitopol's mayor after his alleged abduction by Russia. According to sources, Russian President Putin was considering the proposal from Bennett, whom he met last Saturday, marking his first meeting with a foreign leader since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The US called on Israel to join the sanctions and bar Russian oligarchs after a number of private jets reportedly traveled from Russia to Israel.
I'm outside Ukraine's embassy in Tel Aviv. Now, Bennett sees his role as clarifying both Ukraine and Russia's positions, both to each other and to other countries. Israel is balancing its relations with both, with Bennett not directly blaming Russia for the war, while Lapid has. How far this balance can be maintained is likely to depend on how far the war escalates. Ukraine too appears to be balancing both praise for Israel's mediation and humanitarian efforts, with criticism at times for not doing more. And according to sources, Israel has now begun considering Ukrainian requests for some defensive equipment like helmets and flak jackets. This is Jodie Cohen for WION World is One.
The carnival in Rio is all set to make a comeback for the first time since 2020, and all of the top samba schools in the Brazilian city have already started technical rehearsals in the city's Sambadrome. We leave you with these visuals. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, DC. Thanks for watching.
Now it's carnival. Everyone is focused, respecting all the protocols from the health secretary. And if God wants, we will give the spectators the biggest show of all time.